When the internet began, bulletin board services, or BBS, became the first online communities of the so-called information superhighway. Using their phone lines, people logged in from all over America to talk about sports, games, movies, and on one BBS in particular, share their ghost stories. Over time, those communities all went dark, except for one lone server that continues to operate somewhere in an unknown part of Pennsylvania's Rust Belt. A relic of the 1990s, veiled in mystery, it is a digital archive of humanity's strangest encounters with the unknown, as told by the people who experienced them. My name is Brandon Schexnayder, and you are listening to Fear Daily.
Subject, my voice. User, 17Prime. Posted, June 19th, 1999.
I've been sitting here, staring at the screen for over an hour, trying to convince myself I don't need to post this. I keep telling myself it's nothing, that I'm overreacting. But I can't shake the feeling that something is wrong, really wrong, and if I don't find help somewhere, then everything I love is going to be destroyed. It all started with a call from my ex-wife, Tracy. Usually, she's not the type to panic, so when she called late one night saying something's wrong with Beth, it got my attention. Beth is my daughter, 11 years old, too smart for her own good, tough as nails, and a little too into scary stories. She lives with Tracy most of the time, and I get her every other weekend with holidays and a few weeks during the summer, but we chat almost every day. I figured if something real was going on, I'd have known about it. So when I heard Tracy's voice on the line, I just figured it was normal kid stuff. Maybe she'd had a bad dream after reading all those damn Goosebumps books, but that definitely wasn't it. The first time, I dropped everything and went over to check on Beth, who was curled up on the couch watching Nick at Night, looking like any other kid her age. But something was a little off from normal. Nothing crazy, but definitely something. She didn't run up and hug me like usual. Instead, she just looked at me, her eyes a little too wide, her expression strangely calm. "Hi, Daddy," she said, her voice soft and even. "Hey, sweetheart," I said, trying to sound normal. "How are you?" Her lips curled into a slow smile. "Daddy, he's here." That made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. "Who's here?" I asked. Her smile got wider and she leaned in like she was sharing a secret. "You'll see." I glanced at Tracy, expecting her to say something, but she just shook her head, looking just as confused as I was. Nothing else happened that night. Beth sat quietly, then brushed her teeth and went to bed like nothing was wrong. So I convinced myself it was just a weird phase. But the next time Tracy called, she sounded scared. She told me the kid had been sleepwalking, standing in the hallway in the middle of the night, whispering to herself. When Tracy asked who she was talking to, Beth said, "Daddy." Except I wasn't there. I drove over again, determined to figure out what was going on, and honestly, she looked fine when I got there, though there was, again, something unsettling in the way my daughter looked at me. It felt like she was waiting for something. So that night, I stayed on Tracy's couch, and Around 2 a.m., I woke up to the sound of footsteps upstairs. They were slow and deliberate, like someone pacing back and forth. My heart raced as I crept up the stairs. Beth's door was cracked open and I could hear her talking. Her voice was low, almost like a chant. I stood outside, my hand anxiously gripping the doorknob, knuckles white as a ghost. "Beth," I whispered. The talking stopped. "Honey, who are you talking to?" There was a long silence. Then she stepped into the doorway, her face barely lit by the hallway light. Her eyes were wide and glassy, her head tilted slightly to the side like she was listening to something I couldn't hear. "Daddy," she said. But it wasn't in her voice, it was deeper, older. "You remember me, don't you?" A cold knot formed in my stomach. I couldn't move. That voice triggered something deep in my brain. I had heard it before. Not recently, mind you, not from anyone I know, but I knew that dark voice emanating from my daughter's mouth. I was 11 the first time I heard it. We lived in a small house that backed up against a thick stretch of woods on the wrong side of the train tracks. My mom always warned me not to wander too far, told me there were junkies out there in the woods and they wouldn't think twice about hurting me, but I was stubborn. Well, one day, I went deeper than I should have and found an old shed hidden in the trees. It was rotting and half collapsed, but something about it drew me in, and while I considered my mom's warning about who exactly might be in there, I felt this intense pull that I couldn't even begin to resist. Inside, the air smelled like soured milk, and on the walls were shelves lined with jars filled with dead insects, bones, and dark liquid. But the most unsettling part of all was that in the middle of the floor, there was a circle drawn in what looked like dried blood. I don't remember much after that, just flashes, running through the woods, a voice calling my name, and walking up on my front porch at dusk, covered in scratches. The nightmares started not long after that. They were always the same. I'd be standing in front of that old shed and a voice from inside would call my name, but it wasn't any voice. It was my own voice. It begged me to open the door. Eventually, the dreams stopped and I thought it was over. Hell, I hadn't thought about that shed in the woods for decades. That is, until now. "Daddy," she said in my own voice, "I've known you for a long time," she continued, smiling in a way no child ever should. "Since you were a little boy, I've been waiting for you to remember me." The lights in the hall then dropped off, and everything in the house, the bedrooms, bathrooms, dining room, everything was swallowed by darkness. There was no light, no sound, nothing. "Miss me?" my voice said, echoing through the nothingness that engulfed us both. "I missed you." As quickly as it came, the lights switched back on, and I don't just mean the light in the hall. I mean every light in the house lit up like it was morning. Beth blinked like she'd just woken up, yawned, and muttered something about being tired, reaching out for a hug before shuffling back to bed. as if nothing happened at all. But something did. I think whatever I found in those woods when I was her age never really left me. It's been waiting, biding its time, and now it's found its way back through her. If anyone knows what to do, tell me, please. I'm afraid to leave her alone, but I'm even more afraid to ask the wrong questions and find out what this thing really wants.
Subject: I think I might be dead. User: B2Z. Posted July 3rd, 1997.
I think I might be dead. I felt it the second I opened my eyes. Life just felt heavy. There was an elephant on my chest. My ears sounded like I was underwater, and my eyes were glazed over by a layer of smog. I couldn't remember falling asleep the night before, even what day it was, and my brain felt like I was drugged. I stared at the ceiling for I don't know how long, until finally I got up the nerve to get out of bed. My body felt like it had been hit by a truck as I walked over to the window. Elm Hill Parkway stretched out in front of me, unusually quiet for what seemed like the middle of a day. But what day was it anyway? I saw the same cracked sidewalks and crooked lampposts, but whether it was my eyes or the world around me, it seemed dulled, like a dream version of my hometown, a place built from old memories and frayed edges. Yeah, that's exactly what this felt like. I was trapped in a world pieced together from fragments of the past. Just as I had before, staring at the ceiling, I stared out at the seemingly dream world in front of me until finally, once again, got up the nerve to leave my condo. Outside, I walked down the old cracked sidewalk and experienced a world without anyone else. It was strange, foreboding, quiet. There was no wind, no background noise, nothing, as if life was just sucked out of everything. Then, a church bell rang. I turned the corner and saw St. Mary's Episcopal, the old bell tower standing like a sentinel looming over the empty street. But eerily, there was a black hearse parked by the curb, the back door wide open, as if someone had just unloaded a casket for services. The bell rang again. Yet, there was no crowd, no pallbearers, just that hearse sitting there, waiting. I don't know why I decided to walk over to it. Maybe it was instinct, or maybe it was the strange pull of something I couldn't quite name, but I did. And I got chills when I pulled that heavy church door open and then stepped inside that massive place of worship. The air inside was stale with incense and dust thick enough to choke on. But when I looked up, I saw there were people. Every pew was packed, shoulder to shoulder, with friends and family and old colleagues I hadn't seen in years, old classmates, distant cousins, neighbors who moved away when I was still in high school. Yet, even with the sound of that big door opening and my steps echoing loudly through the rafters, not a single one of them looked at me. Their eyes stayed locked forward, faces blank. There was a priest leading the services at the pulpit, his voice low and rhythmic like an old recording played just a little too slow. We gather here today to mourn the loss of a life cut short, a life that, despite its flaws, carried weight and meaning. May they find peace in the next world. I scanned the room, my breath getting shallow as panic set in. There was a closed casket in the front, draped in black. It looked expensive, polished to a high shine, the kind of thing reserved for important people or tragedies too big to ignore. My breath caught in my throat when I saw her. My mother was there. She sat in the front row, hands folded in her lap. Her eyes were fixed on the casket, her face pale and drawn. Next to her, my sister stared at the floor, clutching a crumpled tissue in her hand. Neither of them moved. Neither of them blinked. I tried to step closer to say something, but my feet felt like they were rooted to the floor. My voice locked somewhere between my chest and my mouth. The priest kept talking, his voice blending into a low hum of static and grief. I tuned him out, my eyes focused on the casket. I didn't want to look at it, but I couldn't help it. The longer I stared, the more the walls seemed to press in around me. Was I in there? Then the priest said something that made my stomach drop. Though we bury no body today, the spirit has already passed beyond our reach. A cold rush of pure primal fear swept over me. No body? I scanned the crowd again, searching for some kind of answer, but no one seemed to notice. My pulse quickened as the meaning of his words sank in. There wasn't a body in the casket for me to see, but yeah, this was my funeral. The priest paused, his head tilting ever so slightly in my direction. He didn't look at me, but he definitely saw me. The dead must learn how to let go, he said, his lips curling into a thin, knowing smile. The congregation turned in unison, their heads moving like marionettes on tangled strings. Their eyes found me, hollow and vacant, their faces twisting into something I couldn't quite recognize. I backed toward the door, but the door was not there anymore. The pews stretched endlessly into the dark, and the walls of the church seemed to bend inward, trapping me inside. I ran down the aisle, heart pounding, every step sinking deeper into the floor like I was wading through quicksand. The casket stood at the front like a black hole, pulling me in, sucking at me, growing larger with every second. Then the lid creaked open. I think I might be dead. I felt it the second I opened my eyes. Life just felt heavy. There was an elephant on my chest. My ears sounded like I was underwater, and my eyes were glazed over by a layer of smog.
Fear Daily is an independent podcast hosted by Brandon Schexnayder and written by Brennan Storr, with Joanna Smith serving as the consulting editor, audio production by Rachel Boyd, and sound design by Southern Gothic Media. This podcast is a work of fiction. Names, characters, places, and incidents are either products of the author's imagination or are used fictitiously. Any resemblance to actual persons, living or dead, or to real events or locations, is entirely coincidental. Ad-free versions of Fear Daily are available now on your favorite podcast apps. For more information, visit feardaily.com. But move fast, before the server goes offline.